legendary, powerful, and certainly eye-catching. These are just a few of the ways you could describe the AK-47 within the Call of Duty franchise. The weapon is almost as much a staple as weapons in Call of Duty alone, having been in every single title of the modern Call of Duty era save for World at War and World War II, and either some capacity of the rightful name of AK-47 or some other subtle variation in naming and model build, but based off the same iconic weapon. Today, I want to start to take a deep dive into the evolution of the weaponry that we'll be seeing once again come this October with Modern Warfare's launch as a celebration of the weaponry's history as well as a transition into more Modern Warfare content. In this video and in this series, should we continue, I want to examine each of the weapons at a level of each of their unique characteristics. Not every weapon is as simple as a copy and paste from years previously, though admittedly I say that with a few iterations of the AK-47 being relatively the same. But I also want to showcase each of these weapons and what they brought to the table that their predecessors didn't, and in a lot of cases, what their successors didn't either. And with all that in mind, I figured, of all the weaponry we could detail, why not start with one of the most iconic, in that of the AK-47. If you want to see more of this, be sure to let me know down there in the comment section down below, and if you're not already, maybe considering the subscribe button to stay up to date with all of it. But anyways, let's start at the beginning. Let's start where the legend began for some. Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare. This was the AK-47's first introduction into the franchise and where many fell in love with it initially. As much of a cop-out as it may seem, that's actually probably one of the most unique factors that we'll see here as we'll move into the next introduction. It's relatively the same, but a unique property of this version in COD 4 was that it was that first entry into the series, the first of its kind. Boasting a damage upwards of 40 DPS and a whopping headshot multiplier of 1.4 times that of a standard shot, theoretically it would allow you to two-shot a player, but recoil constraints sometimes made that a bit tough for you to hit 2 headshots in a row. With a rate of fire of 705 RPM and a magazine size of 30 rounds, you could more than adequately go through your opposition and net yourself a few nice streaks in the process. The overall feel of the gun was fantastic, and it was one that players loved while unknowingly kicking off a streak of one of the most popular weapons to come. Modern Warfare 2 shares plenty in common with the original Modern Warfare, as we mentioned. The most unique portion of Modern Warfare's AK-47 was the initial introduction, and the most unique property of Modern Warfare 2's variation is that of the model, with some slight redesign on the body, a different build, and some slight change up to the animations in relation to the character position and also movements made this one a subtle change up from the original Modern Warfare. Statistically speaking, it was identical, touting the same damage properties of upwards of 40 DPS, downwards of 30, the same multipliers of 1.4 times with a headshot multiplier and a standard 1 non-existent multiplier across the boards for hitting the chest and or limbs, and that of the magazine size, the reload speeds, and recoil as well as rate of fire were all the same as well. The unique properties here at this again being the build of the weapon itself. Next in the line of succession is Black Ops, the first entry in the Treyarch portfolio that would offer the weapon to players. Taking us back to the Cold War era, there were a couple of unique takes on the weapon that differed from the previous Infinity Ward counterparts. Naturally, given the time difference and completely overlooking that each studio has 2 different design directions, the image of the weapon was slightly different. This allowed us to see an AK-47 with more of a wood finish, closer to what we saw in the original Modern Warfare. Additionally, this changed up the design philosophy of the weapon, as well as giving us our first real break from the weapon statistics compared to the 2 introductions previously. While the damage, multipliers, magazine size, reload speeds, and recoil all remained relatively constant and statistically the same values, the rate of fire was actually increased compared to years prior. This version of the AK-47 saw the first rate of fire adjustment and brought it up to 750 RPM. While rate of fire difference of 45 rounds doesn't seem like a whole lot to consider, the feel is significant and also introduced a bit more of a conscious level of play in relation to ammunition. The higher the fire rate, the faster you'll burn through that ammo. To this day, the Black Ops AK-47 actually shares the title of the fastest fire rate among AK-47 variants that we'll discuss in this video, tied only with that of the AK-12 from Advanced Warfare. Now fast forward a little bit further to November 8th of 2011, and we'll see our next introduction of the AK-47. This one, arguably the best iteration that we've seen to date with the weapon. What Modern Warfare 3 holds the title of comfortably is that of the highest damage properties with its variation of the AK-47. To this day, we haven't seen an AK variant top this, and while one got close, it couldn't dethrone it. Modern Warfare 3's AK-47 offered a max DPS of 49, and with the headshot multiplier, if you even hit one headshot, you were all but guaranteed a 2-shot kill. Save for limb shots at the absolute furthest distance that the weapon would reach, one headshot would do just about 70% of the work, and the rest was down to that one final bullet. Surprisingly still, the AK-47 didn't have the fastest time to kill in Modern Warfare 3 despite those powerhouse numbers. But naturally, with a high damage like that, we saw our first reduction in the weapon's fire rates at that point. It's not much of a drop-off compared to others that we'll see later on in the franchise, but it was the first reduction that we saw, with the weapon fire rate dropping down to 697 RPM, meaning that shot placement mattered a little more than before, even if just a tad. The next year, Black Ops 2 showcased the AK-47, but strangely, only in campaign and in zombies. For the majority of the player base, the genuine AK-47 was not available to play with in the multiplayer of Black Ops 2, and instead was replaced by the near-future counterpart in the way of the AN-94, strictly speaking to continuity of the Black Ops universe. The real-life variation of the AN-94 was introduced in the late 90s, and was designed as a potential replacement for the AK weaponry in current service. As for the weapon in-game though, the weapon offered its standard 40 DPS but also saw its furthest drop in lowest damage potential, dropping one more point lower than the previously seen Modern Warfare 3 spread, hitting 24 damage per shot. This in turn, along with multipliers, allowed for a 5-hit kill, which is definitely out of the ordinary for most rifles in COD to this date, and especially for an AK level of weapon. In relative comparison, however, the time to kill in Black Ops 2 was significantly lower than that of what we'd seen in the past games leading up to this title. For the first time as well, there were multiple variations to the reload speed on offer, but to save you the influx of data points in each reload speed, the biggest key unique factor of the AN-94 was in the reload category and also some of the rate of fire. In the reload category, that was the first breakaway, and up until this point, we'd seen only a reload speed of 2.5 seconds loaded reload and a 3.25 second unloaded speed, meaning that if you reload with rounds still in the magazine versus a full reload, including the cocking animation. Another interesting factor, though, about the AN-94 was again that drop in the fire rate. This time it was actually pretty drastic, but it also had some redeeming factors at the very beginning. The rate of fire for the AN-94 dipped all the way down to 625 RPM, which is a big curveball for what AK enthusiasts were used to at the time, a nearly full drop of 100 rounds per minute. The unique standout point though with this dip, however, was that it wasn't a uniform fire rate, with the first two shots firing much faster than the others before it, evening out to a regulated 625 RPM. The first two shots actually raced all the way up to 937 rounds per minute, but naturally those first two shots don't last long. This also, interestingly enough, produced a meta used for a bit of time by players that would burst pop those first two weapons and let it reset to add that boost to the fire rate. Now, the effectiveness of this, admittedly, was entirely situational, and it would catch on for some, but not so much for others. Fast forward once again a little further, and Ghost saw another subtle change up to the AK library, as we didn't have the introduction of the full-on AK-47 in Ghosts, but instead, we were introduced to the AK-12 for the first time. This offered a few unique characteristics that were interesting in their own rights. Speaking strictly damage-wise, this variation of the AK ended up having the second best damage per shot, falling just shy of that of the Modern Warfare 3 crown, missing it only by 1 DPS, with Ghost's max damage on the AK coming out to 48. The rest of the damage followed recent years' patterns and having a higher spread compared to the original variations, in which Ghost's damage dropped from 48 to 25. Quite a hefty spread there. What was also curious with this, however, was that your shots mattered differently depending on the fire rate that you selected with it. The standard full auto headshot multiplier was barely higher than that of the standard multiplier or non-existent multiplier of 1 seen on the chest and limbs, clocking in at just 0.05% bonus, but when you ended up putting that damage into semi-auto mode, that multiplier would jump up from 1.05 all the way up to 1.4, becoming reminiscent of the older titles in the headshot multipliers there. This as well extended the multiplier down to the neck if in semi-auto as well, offering even more viability for the weapon in that fire mode. The reloads of the weapon also became a bit abnormal as well, being a little more unique, being higher than previous iterations, with a loaded reload coming in at 3.27 seconds and a full reload being 3.6 seconds, offering not much difference between the two variations, but also clocking in slower than any other variation before it. Fire rate wise, it was better than the year past in Black Ops 2, coming in at 689 RPM while in full auto, but naturally dipping to the lowest that we'd seen up until this point to 530 RPM while in semi-auto. The variation offered quite a change up in various ways that we still haven't seen again even to this day. Advanced Warfare at the beginning was in the same boat as Ghosts, offering up a different version than that of the AK-47, but also continuing the streak of the AK-12. The AK-47 was introduced into the game, but not until a little later on, and also as a DLC weapon, one that even to this day has eluded my own personal account, and you may be in the exact same boat as I am with this. Anyways, the AK-47 in Advanced Warfare offered a better than usual damage upwards of 44 DPS, and surprisingly was the highest of rifles and one of the highest of all automatic weapons in Advanced Warfare. Statistically speaking, this otherwise outside of that was middle of the pack, the fire rate dropping to 615, the lowest that we had seen up until that point in the Call of Duty franchise while in full auto. But the perhaps most unique factor about this weapon was that it had an infinite 4-hit kill range, even with a suppressor on the weapon. That means that you could line up a target at the very furthest point of the map, be completely opposite of them, and still take them out in 4 hits. Normally we see a drop off with each weapon, not necessarily to the point of never killing the enemy, but to a further damage output. But for this variation of the AK, it stayed constant at 4 all around. And like we mentioned, there was also the AK-12 at launch of Advanced Warfare, so it's only right to include this one as well. This one had some interesting unique factors to it, some good, some bad. To this day, it actually offers the lowest max damage that we've ever seen in any AK variation or design counterpart, with a max damage of only 33. But optimistically, it also had a fire rate that helped bolster that a little. The fire rate of Advanced Warfare's AK-12 was actually tied for the highest fire rate among AK variations, and is by and far the king out of the last few handful of games that we've had in recent years. Nothing coming close to it since then. The rate of fire was actually bumped to 750 RPM, which is why you can see that damage drop off. With that rate of fire, it would have been a little bit too fast of a time to kill with that higher damage if it were to keep up with recent years previously, but also increasing that rate of fire. Black Ops 3 was the next entry into the Call of Duty franchise, with again another two-piecer here like we saw within Advanced Warfare, one coming at launch, one coming a little later down the line, that have some counterparts here for this. Initially named in the alpha and the beta as the ARC-7, the KN-44 is the design counterpart to the AK-47, and curiously enough, this is right around this time where we saw some licensing things going on with Call of Duty where not other weapons would match up to the distinct counterparts that they were in the real world. So whether or not it was ever intended to be called the AK-47 again in Black Ops 3, or they were trying to keep that futuristic counterpart name of the KN-44 or ARC-7, I guess, in the earlier builds as a mainstay, one may never know. Now, the unique characteristics of both this and the secondary introduction in Black Ops 4 were unique to the time. They've actually kind of since been pushed back a little bit here, but the Black Ops 3 KN-44 was one of the most stable that we'd end up seeing and most versatile of the KN variations up until this point. You could run and gun with it. It would grant you always a 3 to 4 hit kill, but the rate of fire dropped down to one of the lowest that we had seen up until this point, only being beaten out by Advanced Warfare. The KN actually shared the exact same rate of fire as Black Ops 2's AN-94, coming in at 625 RPM. So for all intents and purposes, the KN was honestly pretty middle of the road statistically compared to other variations of the AK. Now, the secondary entry into Black Ops 3 was that of the KVK-99M, which was meant to be a remake of Black Ops 2's AN-94, but statistically, it falls short actually by quite a bit, which is a good thing depending on how you look at it, because it was only available in supply drops, meaning that not everybody had the same chance of getting and playing with this weapon as, say, your next door neighbor. The KVK ended up having the third worst damage output of a weapon of an AK variation with 35, and also at the time had the absolute worst fire rate that we had seen out of any single title up until that point. Again, this is then dwarfed a little later on, as we'll see, but we ended up having a fire rate of 555. But being that it was the reincarnation of the AN-94, that means that it ended up having a fire rate increase on those first 2 shots, in which it did race up to 810, but only for those first 2 rounds. Damage and fire rate wise, it is worse than the Black Ops 2's counterpart, but the nice part is that you end up getting a couple of more shots compared to the Black Ops 2 variation in each magazine. Jumping forward a little bit to Infinite Warfare, the next AK counterpart that we ended up seeing was that of the futuristic variation of the Volk. This, in many different ways, was unique because it wasn't that great. especially compared to other AK variations. This ended up having the second worst damage output, only dwarfed by that of the AK-12 in Advanced Warfare, but again, the fire rate for that at least made up in Advanced Warfare. In Infinite Warfare, the fire rate was 483, being the slowest weapon of all of the AK variations we've seen to date. Didn't pack as much a punch as you maybe would have hoped for in Infinite Warfare. And also only clocking in with 28 rounds per magazine. It also has the lowest ammunition per any AK variation. The positive spin you can take from some of these decreases in stats was that the Volk ended up having the lowest spread between damage outputs. Your max was 34, but your absolute min was also 30. So you're relatively constant across all levels of play in doing the same amount of damage or landing the same amount of shots whenever ending up getting a kill. So in that regard, it's pretty cool. Now, naturally, we're going to skip Call of Duty World War II as that was not in the game, but Black Ops 4 is the next game up, which includes an AK variation, that being the KN-57. Now, admittedly, in terms of across the board for AK variations, it doesn't have all that much of unique factors, but it's very situational and unique in its own right for Black Ops 4 in particular. The KN has a damage output of a max of 40 and a min of 29, which makes it the second highest among ARs in Black Ops 4, only being dwarfed by that of the Rampart, but the differentiation is the rate of fire and also that of the recoil control, which the KN offers you over top of the Rampart. So in that sense, it's definitely something that is much more versatile and as a result has become a mainstay as one of the main ARs, save for the Maddox in Black Ops 4. Other than that, everything else is actually kind of middle of the road comparative to other AK-47 variations and other design counterparts, with other things like the rate of fire coming in at 570, much lower than most of them, making it actually the third worst rate of fire, but with a damage middle of the road and also magazine size being the most of any other AK variation we've seen to date. And that then brings us to, well, the future. The future of the AK-47, because the AK-47 actually makes a return. Modern Warfare, coming out this October, brings with it the AK-47, and Infinity Ward looks to put a little spin on the old classic that we all know and love. We see the reintroduction of some of the older properties that we've discussed here already out of the numerous number of variations of the AK-47, like that of a recognizable magazine size with a standard of 30, but other things, there's a ton of unique factors coming to not only this game, but also the AK-47 in general. Things like the gunsmith are going to allow for much more customization on many levels for every single weapon, but also for the AK-47, allowing us to use things like a round drum, which will have upwards of 75 rounds per drum and do things to the weapon that we never thought would be conceivable in-game. That being things like even changing the AK-47 to the AK-74U with simply adjusting the caliber of bullet and also a few attachments to the weapon. Things like this will make for a very unique perspective and a very unique take on the weapon itself, but the gun at its very base having now probably 6 or 7 hours of playtime of the full multiplayer between a behind closed doors event back in May to a reveal event out in Los Angeles, and also having played a lot of Modern Warfare's 2v2 alpha, in which I got a little bit of hands-on time with the AK. I can confidently say it feels like such a great weapon, and it's one that I cannot wait to get my hands on a little bit further and just a little bit down the line with the beta of Modern Warfare coming soon. But anyways, that is the complete evolution of the AK-47, its many variations, its many design counterparts, and its full extent in the Call of Duty franchise. So that said, as we look forward to what we end up seeing in the future, let me know your thoughts firstly down there in the comment section down below if you guys want to see more of these, and also what weapon you'd like to see the full evolution of next. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, make sure you drop a like down below, and of course, if you are new to the channel, make sure you guys subscribe so you don't miss a single thing regarding all things Modern Warfare and all things Call of Duty. We'll keep you up to date with absolutely anything you need to know. If you guys also want to follow me over on Twitter and Instagram, those are the best place to get connected outside of YouTube. Practically live on both those. So if you guys want to strike up a conversation, ask me a question, whatever it may be, that link is down there in the description below. But let's head out of the way. Thank you guys all so much for watching. Mine is Espresso. I'll see you guys later. Take care and peace.